The year was 2003 when Daniel and Patricia Shea loaded the last of their moving boxes into the back of a rented truck and pulled away from their cramped apartment in Little Rock. They had been saving for 6 years. 6 years of skipped vacations, secondhand furniture, and home-cooked meals eaten at a folding table in a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time. But now, at last, they had enough. They had found the house. It sat on the edge of a town called Millhaven, a small community about 40 miles outside of Fort Smith. Tucked into the dense Ozark foothills where the tree lines grew thick and the roads narrowed into single lanes that wound through hollow after hollow. The property was listed at well below market value, which Patricia had noticed immediately. She had asked the realtor about it 3 times. And each time the woman smiled and said the previous owners had simply been eager to relocate. Daniel had not pushed further. He was a practical man, an engineer by training, and he believed in what he could measure and explain. The price was good. The structure was sound. The land was beautiful. That was enough. Their 2 children made the move with excitement typical of young people who do not yet understand what leaving a place truly means. Maya was 11, sharp-eyed and bookish, the kind of girl who carried a notebook everywhere she went, and filled it with observations about people and places that were startlingly accurate for someone her age. Her younger brother Caleb was 8, loud and physical, happiest when he was running or climbing or throwing something. The 2 of them tumbled out of the truck the moment it stopped and sprinted toward the tree line at the back of the property before Patricia could even call out a warning. The house itself was a 2-story colonial, white clapboard with black shutters. Built sometime in the 1940s according to the county records, it had a wide front porch, a detached garage that leaned slightly to the left, a kitchen with original tilework and a faded checkerboard pattern, 4 bedrooms upstairs that still smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Something Patricia could not name, something that reminded her of churches and old paper and the particular silence of places that have held too many people for too long. The first strange thing happened on the 3rd night. Patricia woke at 2:47 in the morning, which she knew because she rolled over and looked at the digital clock on Daniel's nightstand before she fully understood what had pulled her out of sleep. The house was completely quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a sleeping household, but a deeper, denser silence, the kind that seems almost physical, as if the air itself has thickened. She lay still for a moment, waiting to hear whatever had woken her. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, unhurried footsteps coming from the hallway outside their bedroom door. Her first thought was Caleb. He sometimes sleepwalked, had done it twice in the old apartment. She got up quietly, trying not to disturb Daniel, and opened the bedroom door. The doors to both children's rooms were closed. She stood there in the dark for a long moment, listening, then went to check on the kids. Maya was sound asleep, her notebook open on the pillow beside her. Caleb was curled into a tight ball under his covers, his breathing slow and even. Patricia told herself it had been nothing, a house settling, the expansion and contraction of old wood under temperature change. Daniel would have said exactly that, and he would have been right. She went back to bed. She did not mention it to anyone. The second thing happened 5 days later, and this time it was Maya who experienced it. Maya had been sitting in the corner of the living room after dinner, drawing in her notebook, while her parents washed dishes and Caleb watched television in the den. She was sketching the fireplace, which she found interesting because it had a carved wooden mantel with small decorative figures built into the design. Owls. and leaves and what appeared to be a human face worked subtly into the grain of the wood on the right side. She was concentrating hard on getting the proportions right when she became aware that someone was standing near the window to her left. She turned, expecting her mother. The space by the window was empty, but the air near it felt different, she wrote later in her notebook. Using the word heavy and then crossing it out and writing full instead, as if something was occupying a space without being visible, she sat very still for almost a minute. Then the television in the den switched off on its own, and Caleb began yelling for someone to come fix it, and the moment broke. Maya wrote 3 lines in her notebook and closed it and did not open it again that evening. Daniel noticed the smell first. It began appearing in the basement, which he had been converting into a workshop, a damp, organic odor that he initially attributed to the old stone foundation and the heavy Arkansas spring rains they had been having. He bought a dehumidifier and ran it for 2 weeks. The moisture readings dropped to acceptable levels. The smell remained. It was not a rot smell, not exactly, though there was something of decay in it. It was more like the smell of very old soil that has never been exposed to sunlight. The smell of depth and darkness and the cold patience of underground things. He did not say anything to Patricia. She was happy here. He could see it in the way she moved through the rooms, already making them her own, already filling the space with color and sound and the particular warmth that she brought to every place she inhabited. He was not going to upset that over a smell. It was Caleb who made the first direct contact. He was playing in the backyard on a Saturday morning in late April, kicking a soccer ball against the back fence. When he stopped and turned around and looked at the house as if someone had called his name, Patricia was watching from the kitchen window while she made lunch. She saw him stop, turn, look. Then she saw him walk deliberately toward the back corner of the yard, to a spot near the old cedar tree where the ground was slightly raised in a long, narrow mound that they had assumed was a drainage feature of some kind. He stood there for a long time. When he came inside, his face had a faraway expression that Patricia did not recognize, a kind of blank calm that sat wrong on her loud, energetic boy. She asked him what he had been doing. He said he had been talking to the man who lived under the tree. She asked him carefully what the man had said. Caleb thought about it for a moment, and then shrugged, and said the man was sad and wanted them to find something. Patricia asked what he wanted them to find. Caleb said he did not know, that the man had not told him that part yet. Then he asked for his lunch, and the conversation ended. That night, Patricia told Daniel everything. Footsteps. The feeling by the window that Maya had described to her. The smell in the basement that was not getting better. And now, Caleb and the man under the tree. She expected Daniel to be dismissive in the gentle, patient way he had, to offer explanations and reassurances. Instead, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told her about the smell, and about something he had not mentioned to her a morning 3 weeks earlier when he had been working in the basement and had heard, clearly and unmistakably, a child's voice say his name. He had searched every room in the house. Children were both at school. Tricia had been at a meeting with her new employer in Fort Smith. He had been alone. They did not sleep much that night. The following week, Tricia went to the Millhaven Public Library and spent a day going through the county historical records. The property had a long history. The land had been part of a larger farming estate in the 1800s, broken up and sold piecemeal after the original family died out in the early 1900s. There had been several structures on the property over the years, not just the house that stood there now. There had been an older farmhouse demolished in 1938, and before that, according to a hand-drawn survey map from 1887, something the map labeled simply as a workers' quarter, a small building set well back from the main house. In approximately the location of the cedar tree in the Shea family's backyard, she found a death record. A man named Solomon Prout, listed as a farmhand, had died on the property in 1891. The cause of death was recorded as an accident. Nothing more specific than that. There was no record of where he had been buried. In that era, in that part of Arkansas, a farmhand who died under unspecified circumstances would not necessarily have received a marked grave or a church burial. Patricia sat with that information for a long time before she drove home. She did not tell the children what she had found, but she did tell Daniel, and together they made a quiet agreement to pay attention to what was happening in their home without panicking. Without acting precipitously, and without letting fear make decisions for them, They were a grounded family. They had built their life on steadiness. They would approach this the same way. But the activity escalated. Maya began waking at the same time each night, 3:15. Pulled out of sleep by the sound of something moving in the walls. Not rats, not the irregular skittering of an animal, but a rhythmic, purposeful sound, like something being dragged slowly across an interior surface. She started keeping a log, recording the date and time and duration each time it happened, the way a scientist would. She was 11 years old, and she kept better records than most adults would have. The lights in the basement began switching off on their own while Daniel was working. He installed new switches. It made no difference. The temperature in the hallway outside the children's rooms dropped noticeably on certain nights. Cold enough that both kids began sleeping with extra blankets even as the Arkansas spring warmed into summer. A mirror in the upstairs bathroom developed a crack overnight, a clean diagonal line from corner to corner with no clear cause. Patricia found handprints on the inside of the basement window, small handprints, child-sized, on the glass that faced inward. The basement had no interior access to that window. There was no way a child could have made those prints from inside. Caleb kept going to the cedar tree. He said the man's name was Solomon. He said Solomon did not know he was dead. He said Solomon kept asking them to look under the floor of the old building, but Caleb did not know what building he meant because there was no building there anymore. He said Solomon was not angry, just confused and trapped. The way you feel in a dream when you know something is wrong but you cannot figure out what it is. Patricia wrote all of this down. She did not dismiss any of it. In late June, Daniel rented a ground-penetrating radar unit from a surveying company in Fort Smith. He told the company he was checking for old foundation remnants before putting in a garden. He ran the scanner over the area around the cedar tree on a Sunday morning while the kids were at their grandmother's house. He found two things. The first was the unmistakable outline of a building foundation, small and rectangular, in exactly the location the 1887 survey map had indicated. The second was a void beneath the floor of that foundation, a space approximately 4 feet long, 2 feet wide and 2 feet deep, situated beneath what would have been the northwest corner of the structure. He called Patricia out to look at the readings. They stood together in the backyard in the warm morning air and looked at the screen, and neither of them said anything for a while. They debated what to do for almost 2 weeks. Daniel's instinct was to investigate, to dig, to find out what was there. Patricia worried about what they might find, and more than that, about what it would mean to disturb it. She did some reading. She spoke quietly and without identifying herself to a woman at the university in Fayetteville who studied folklore and folk beliefs in the Ozarks region. The woman told her that in the traditions of that area, a person who died without rites, without acknowledgement, without proper sending off, was understood to be bound to the place of death until that wrong was corrected. It was not a ghost in the Hollywood sense, not something malevolent or theatrical. It was simply an unfinished thing. A person still waiting. Patricia thought about Solomon Prout, dead in 1891, cause unspecified. Buried unmarked on land that would change hands a dozen times over the next century, each new family unknowing. Each set of new owners walking over his resting place without awareness. She thought about how long that was. She thought about loneliness, in a way she had not thought about it before. They dug on a Saturday in mid-July. Daniel and a friend he trusted. A man named Robert who had known him since college and who had listened to the whole story over several evenings. And 2 bottles of whiskey, and had said simply that he believed them and would help however he could. They dug carefully, using hand tools, taking their time. 3 feet down, in the northwest corner of the old foundation space, they found a wooden box. It had deteriorated badly but had not fully collapsed. Inside, wrapped in what had once been cloth and was now mostly fiber and dust, were 3 objects. A small knife with a bone handle. A folded piece of paper that crumbled when they tried to open it. And a tin locket containing a photograph so faded as to be almost unreadable, though if you held it at the right angle in the right light. You could make out the suggestion of a face, a young woman looking directly at whoever had taken the picture. Daniel photographed everything before touching it. Robert stood back and said nothing. The air around the excavation was very still. They brought the objects inside. Patricia held the locket for a long time. Then she laid all 3 items on the kitchen table and they sat around them, and Patricia said, quietly and directly, addressing the air in the room in a way that felt both strange and entirely natural, that they had found what was there, that they saw him, that they knew his name, that he had not been forgotten, that he was known to them now, and that whatever had been left undone, they intended to see it made right. The house was quiet that night, in a way it had not been since they moved in, not the thick, pressurized silence of something waiting, a lighter quiet, a resting quiet. They arranged for a burial. A local pastor, a practical and open-hearted man who had heard stranger things in his decades of ministry, agreed to perform a brief graveside service. They reinterred the box and its contents at the edge of the property, near the cedar tree, with a small stone marker. The pastor read from Scripture. Patricia left flowers. Caleb stood very still throughout, and afterward said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of an 8-year-old who has no reason to doubt his own perceptions, that Solomon was gone now, that he had gone somewhere better, that he had seemed relieved. The handprints on the basement window disappeared. Daniel noticed the smell was gone before he consciously registered that it had been absent for several days. Maya's 3:15 waking stopped. The footsteps in the hallway did not return. The lights in the basement stayed on. The temperature in the upstairs hallway normalized. The house settled into itself in a new way, a quieter and more ordinary way. And though the Shea family remained alert for some time afterward, listening and watching with the heightened awareness of people who have learned that the world contains more than they were taught, nothing further happened. They lived in that house for 11 more years. Maya went on to study folklore and anthropology at the University of Arkansas, writing her undergraduate thesis on oral traditions surrounding unsanctioned burials in the Ozarks region. Her advisor, reading her fieldwork section, asked if the primary informant for one of her case studies was a real person. Maya said yes. Her advisor asked if she could contact them. Maya said she would ask her mother. Caleb became a civil engineer, like his father, and maintained a firm and cheerful refusal to discuss the summer of 2003 with anyone who did not already know the story. He was not frightened or damaged by what had happened. If anything, he seemed in the way of people who have experienced something that fundamentally reorganizes their understanding of the world before they are old enough to have invested too heavily in any particular version of it, simply and quietly certain. Certain that people persist in some form after the body fails. Certain that they can be heard. Certain that what they most need in the end is not very different from what the living need. To be known. To be found. To be allowed finally to rest. Daniel retired at 62 and built the workshop he had always wanted in the basement of the Millhaven house, where the smell of old soil had long since been replaced by the cleaner smell of sawdust and machine oil. He never became a believer in the supernatural in any formal or theological sense. He remained the man he had always been, precise and empirical, trusting what he could measure. But he kept the photographs he had taken of the box and its contents in a folder in his desk drawer. And when people asked him if he believed in ghosts, he would pause in the careful way of someone who has learned to be exact, and say that he believed in unfinished business, and that sometimes, if you were paying attention, you could help finish it. Patricia planted a garden near the cedar tree. She tended it every spring and summer for the rest of the years they lived there. She left a small bouquet at the stone marker on the first Sunday of every November. Not because any tradition required it, but because it seemed right. Because a man had lived and worked on that land and died there without anyone to remember him, and she had the capacity to remember him, and so she did. Believed that was enough. She believed in the way of a woman who has held a stranger's locket in her hands and felt the weight of a century's loneliness in a piece of cold tin. It might even be everything. The house on the edge of Millhaven stood long after the Shea family moved on. New families came. None of them reported anything unusual. The cedar tree grew older and broader and cast a deeper shadow over the corner of the yard where the small stone rested in the grass. The stone was worn but readable. Patricia had insisted on that, had chosen a harder stone than was strictly necessary, a stone that would outlast practical need. She wanted it to last. It said only Solomon Prout, known at last.